Hi. Hello. How are
Hey,
you?
hello everybody.
Let's get to another real American story here, talking about
Yes.
a film that probably many or most of you have seen, The Gangs of New York, a 2002 Scorsese joint. Uh, I've only watched it a few times versus like Titanic or The Patriot that we've previously done. And I just rewatched it just to be like, just to remind myself how I felt about it. And I
Yes.
still don't like it.
Oh,
It's really,
I love it so much.
do you? I
I
really don't.
absolutely adore it. It is a very much a man movie.
That's the thing that I think I finally have accepted in my adult years is, with the exception of The Departed and Goodfellas, I don't really enjoy Scorsese movies. I just don't.
That is fair, and that's fair. That's a hot take, but it's fair. And Scorsese he's a living legend. But it's
Sure.
like every movie he makes is like a top five for like a guy between 18 and 45.
I
It's
know.
this red meat male gaze, but also like the male violence and the
It's
grit.
super hyper patriarchy,
Yes.
very very unkind to women in most of the films. Female characters are barely important in most of his
They're
movies,
one dimensional always.
very much so. And yeah, they rate for me, they range from being like really enjoyable and rewatchable to I
Hmm.
will never watch this movie again. That movie, of course, being The Irishman, which is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I
Which, yes,
fucking hated that movie.
loathe that movie with every fiber of your being. It still holds a higher place in the ranking for me. But it is too long, just like Gangs of New York. It's too long, first of all.
and too old as well. The actors, the
The only
de-aging was
CGI we
weird.
the only CGI we see in Gangs of New York is like some smoke, some cityscapes,
Some
some
cannons.
ships, some
Yeah.
cannons, yeah, some beards, maybe, some artificial stubble. I don't know.
The
Um,
thing with the de-aging, and I remember we talked about it at the time because I think it was 2020, so we were all watching it like
it
at
was.
home. And I remember you and I talked about this, where I was like, the de-aging was kind of cool, but then you would see them move, and you're like, oh, but they still move like guys that are 70 years
Yeah.
old.
How do we de-age Robert De Niro's knees? Okay, because
Still like
he's like,
when he's fighting, and he's like, ugh,
awful. Yeah,
ugh.
that hurt you more than it hurt that guy. Okay, your toe is broken. No, it's for real. But and he couldn't make that movie without having made all these other crazy movies and gotten this place. And apparently, Scorsese was trying to make this movie, Gangs of New York, for 25 years. Um,
Which
long
is
story.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's really funny that I didn't realize until I was like doing like a little bit of research on this is I didn't realize it was 2002. So we are still in that tiny little chunk of years of like 90s, late 90s into the early 2000s.
The Patriot had just happened.
I
And
know.
apparently the movie was supposed to be released in 2001, but was delayed to
Mm.
2002. And it's a great subject, but yeah, it's very rah rah America,
It's a
very fast and loose with the time period, like the course of events.
Yeah. So let's start at the top of the film itself. So the movie is based on a book called The Gangs of New York, which in and of itself is also controversial for being incredibly historically inaccurate and having a
Yes.
lot of just made up shit
Yeah,
in
yeah.
it.
The book's from 1927, Herbert Asbury, and yeah, it's very like Asbury was a journalist, so
Yeah.
apparently a lot of the stories are kind of cooked, kind of folkloric, and that's the kind of thing that Scorsese reads like, oh yeah, this is really cool. I
Oh, I
want to
love
do
this.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. Like eyebrows. My Scorsese eyebrows.
Where's Fran Lebowitz when you need her?
So I've never read it either, but what I do know about this particular subject matter there is already a lot of folklore around the actual gangs of New York. And so some of the gangs that are made up in the book and in the movie were also made up even at the time in newspapers. The only one that I really knew much about when I first saw the movie or knew anything about it was the Bowery Boys.
Yes,
That
they're the biggest ones.
Yeah.
And they're, of course, another podcast, the Bowery Boys.
Oh, they are a
And
podcast. Yeah.
That's a play on the actual gang that was around. In the
Yeah,
time,
and I
or the
know
nativist.
them because of other riots that they started in New York
Yes.
City at the time.
Yeah, I think the Bowery
So
Boys and the Dead Rabbits had a spat in the 1850s.
yeah,
There's the Atlantic crew. There's like all
yes.
these the Atlantic Guard, like all these crazy, very xenophobic American, like Star Spangled Banner
Oh yeah.
wavers.
So yeah,
It's
so
great.
let's get into the main like theme of the movie is
Yes, the thrust
xenophobia.
of it. Yeah, it's like
Xenophobia and racism.
it makes so much sense that in New York City, this strip of this island, this narrow island, where so many tribes of people in the movie, they describe at one point them as tribes, and there's so
Tribes, they do.
many Native American overtures and overtones, which I would love to discuss.
Yeah,
but it makes so much sense that with all these groups in this confining space, it's so hard to define one's space for one's people, and so the gang becomes the best way to like solidify or expand or defend turf, an area where your people, whether they be Irish, nativist, white Anglos, whatever they may be, can defend themselves. And they really become huge in the 1820s through the 60s.
Yeah, so it really is, if you were to look at Scorsese's films as a whole, this is really like the start, if you want to consider like the gangs of New York.
Yeah.
This is kind of the source material. From what I've read, like generally speaking at the time, one of the main just discrepancies between the film and reality is the level of violence was not quite there.
Correct.
They weren't like we think of gangs today as being extraordinarily violent, high death counts. And it seemed like Scorsese used the Crips and the Bloods or something as his inspiration for the characters of gangs of New York versus what they actually would have been like, which was, more fighting through the political machines at the time. And that's when things would get the most violent, was during voting time in New York.
Yes.
But they would, for the most part, there were never these gory, horrible, horrible battles.
Right. And that's what the scene opens with, is in the first part of the movie is 1846. And
my God, that scene. I had forgot.
The bloody snow. Liam Neeson as the father figure, Priest Valen. It's a huge army. There's like 80 on 150 people there fighting with like Anchorman style. Yeah. Oh yeah. Liam Neeson pause.
Totally
Liam Neeson pause.
I need to pause for Liam.
Something about him in that collar, huh?
I should talk to a therapist about my feelings around him in that collar. Like, he's just the tallest drink of water. I want to climb him like a tree. He's like stunningly handsome in that movie. Like, it's just his peak hotness for him, I think, is like 2000.
He's got the tight Irish curl, which we see a lot of in this movie, that Irish hair.
Yes. And I am a sucker for goofy facial hair. I love giant chops.
Crazy facial hair. Crazy facial, discordant patterns, lots of patterns, lots of stripes and plaids.
We'll come to everybody else
in the 60s. And he's got this like Celtic cross knife thing, like this amazing weapon, which is straight out of like Grindhouse. It's gory. It's so cool. It's very Tarantino-y, like Kill Bill almost. Like bloody.
The whole opening scene is way more Tarantino-esque in the gore level, but also like the blood is like this red-orange color rather than it being like, like a deep, realistic red.
Just so get ready for those TNT reruns.
Yeah, exactly. When they turn yellow. One part that I forgot, which is so brutal, was A guy literally sticks his fingers in a guy's cheek and rips his cheek open.
That was horrible.
Like, Jesus Christ.
And there's
The
this kind
fighting is
of,
brutal.
and there's some really interesting music choices, as always, with this in the beginning.
I hate the music in this movie.
the first
I
fight. Yeah,
hate
it's
it.
got the weird grainy. It's very like Under the what is it? The other movie that was like a desert movie. Anyway, but there's a very common trope of that period of like the high paced action, like gritty, like slow, like close,
Like
and
this. Like someone's doing this with the
yeah,
camera.
it's really a lot. And yeah, the music is a choice. But what I like is that is the only really discordant music choice. The rest of the music in the film is so period and so good.
Yeah.
And there were moments when I was watching where I'm like, it's really operatic. It's like, it's grand, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I didn't understand the purpose of that choice. I don't, it doesn't really go with the scene to me. But yeah, so that opening scene really fucking sets the stage for the insanity that is this movie.
Yes.
And I don't feel the need to really go down the plot, but we can talk about the characters a little bit, I think.
I would love to.
Yeah, so the fight happens because, I'll simply to remind you all, because there's these two warring factions. You have the natives, who are men, I should say, not people, because women, who cares about them? Men who live in New York, who are native New Yorkers. And so they
Yes.
consider themselves natives. They don't like that all these Irish immigrants have come in. They certainly don't like Black people. And so on the other side, you have these Irish immigrants living in tune with Black people, which is hilarious. Also, in these catacombs of New York that don't exist.
I wish they did, my darlings. They do not. There is no such thing as that kind of. You have Manhattan schist, you have sewage, you have poop. You do not have this catacomb where you can secret away your fighting hordes.
And now we have subway tunnels, but they did not then. So there's no grand underground concourse at the time.
But apparently the brewery building, which was the building for which the catacombs was the basement, was real. And
I buy that. That's interesting.
Yeah, the old brewery was around from like the Revolutionary period through the 1850s.
Yeah.
And apparently, now this is where Asbury comes in. He says that when the building was demolished in 1852 or something, they found bones and human remains in the basement.
I remember this. Yeah.
And apparently the basement was big, but not that big. But it was true that like 1,000 people lived in that building during the tenement days in the 1840s and 50s. So it was this disgusting old brewery that people lived in, disgusting hovel. It didn't contain these massive tunnels underneath the ground.
Right. So those are the two. This is the main fight in the movie, is people who feel like New York is theirs, this particular area known as the 5 Points, and that is real. 5 Points are real. These different groups, these gangs are real, even if the names aren't necessarily right or the amount of gangs isn't right. And they're all fighting for these slums, essentially, in what would be Chinatown now.
Yes.
And Luke, you brought it up really, really well, in that when you already have so little and other people start showing up, you're gonna fight about it.
Yes.
You know, so it stands to reason that there and the natives specifically, you know, you're not on their side because they're clearly racist, xenophobic, garbage people.
Yes, correct.
And they start the fight. They're the ones who have been attacking the Irish immigrants literally the second they get off the ship. They are throwing shit at them, hurling insults at them, threatening them. Like,
yes,
it's ridiculous. So that's the core conflict of the film.